Let's turn in our Bibles to Philippians Chapter 4, verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things, the things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me. These do, and the God of peace will be with you. So as you can tell, it's been a couple of days since I've been able to upload, and I've actually really been spending that time meditating on this passage going, what am I to share? Obviously, the first part seems quite straightforward. It's telling us the type of things to meditate on. But I have experienced people using these passages as a way to basically say anything that's negative, like that's going on in your life currently, completely ignore that and just be what's basically classified as toxic positivity. Obviously, they didn't call it that, and obviously, they didn't realize that that's what it was. But it's that whole concept of completely ignoring everything that's going on and I'm just going to be positive. It's actually toxic positivity. And so I was really just processing this. And as I was, verse 9 really jumped out to me of the things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me. And it's like, Paul was writing this to a bunch of people in the church of Philippi who had a relationship with him. They knew what his personality was like. And as we read through these different letters, we can get an idea, because even in this book, in the book of Philippians, he has in one verse told us not to complain, which is completely accurate. We're not to be complaining. But he's also in the other sections been telling us that he is chained to another God. He has told us of different things. And when we look at other books and other letters that he's written, he has outlined different things like that he's been shipwrecked, that he is beaten, that he went hungry, that he's had time of plenty with food. So Paul, when we read his different letters, he's honest. He's actually says with honesty different things that he has gone through. But I think with that, we really need to focus on how. What is his example of how he did it? Is he meditating on those things? No, he doesn't meditate on it. Here he outlines the type of things that he does meditate. And we can even think of one example when it was Paul and Silas in prison. Yet again, in prison again, I lost count how many times Paul ended up in prison. He was sitting in that jail cell just praising God. Yeah, he was in a jail cell. Yeah, he was honest. That's where he was. But he just sat there and praised God to the point that the cell doors opened. And just, I can't even comprehend that. I know God can do it. I know it was real. But it is outside my comprehension of the fact that he was in prison and he just praised God to the point that the cell doors opened up. And I think that is what this passage is getting at. It's getting at that example that Paul gave when he was in prison of no matter what your circumstances are, praise God, because God is still a good God. But it does not mean that you have to ignore what is going on presently. It does mean you have to deal with the things in the past. As in Philippians, he's just said, forgetting those things which are behind, we press forward for the goal that's ahead. So that means we don't cycle over the things that have happened in the past. We don't let our brains just keep mulling over it and over it and over it. We use this list when we're in that point of just cycling over things. We already know the outcome. We've already determined whether it was a good or a bad and how our actions are to proceed forward. And once that's happened, we know when we're in that stage that we're just sort of cycling and we're just caught up of reminiscing over it, but not positive reminiscing, negative reminiscing, and you can feel that it brings you down. And that's where I think this passage jumps in of going, you know what? If the things that you're meditating are not praiseworthy, if they're not pure, if they're not lovely, just stop your brain from cycling over it. And the best way to do that is go do something else to distract your mind. Maybe that is putting on praise music. Maybe I'd say go for a walk. But for me, that is probably the worst thing to do to try and stop my brain from cycling, because that's when I'll cycle even more. But something else, like whatever it is that's going to get your brain active and thinking on something else, and just break that. As I said, that's cycling over the one thought again and again. That's what I think this passage is telling us, and we're to follow Paul's example. So in looking at that, look at both sides of the example of Paul's life, where he's telling us to praise God, but he's being honest of the situations that he has found himself in.